Hey folks, I know I am just an old guy telling stories, but please leave a like and subscribe before we start. Let's enjoy in today's stories. Before I dive into today's stories, I want to say, disclaimer. The content presented in the video is purely for entertainment purposes only. The theories and stories discussed in this video are speculative and are not supported by any evidence or proof. Viewer discretion is advised. I didn't set out to hack into NASA. In fact, if you'd told me a year ago that I'd be sifting through their private communication lines, I would have laughed and asked if you were confusing me with a Hollywood movie. I'm just a regular guy. Sure, I know my way around code and servers, but that's not exactly rare these days. I freelance in cybersecurity, fixing vulnerabilities for small businesses and occasionally helping someone recover their hacked social media account. Nothing glamorous. This all started because I got bored. It was a late Tuesday night, and I was in one of those spirals where you jump from one obscure forum to another, reading posts from people who claim to have seen UFOs or hacked into classified databases. Usually it's just a mix of conspiracy theories and wild stories, but I stumbled across a thread that felt different. A user claimed they'd uncovered something massive, but couldn't share it because they'd been locked out and were scared of being tracked. They dropped a few cryptic hints about backdoor server paths connected to a specific subdomain that looked like it belonged to NASA. I don't know why I decided to dig deeper. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the challenge. Either way, I opened my tools and got to work. It didn't take long to realize the user wasn't lying. Whoever they were, they'd left behind enough breadcrumbs for someone like me to follow. By midnight, I was staring at a login screen that didn't look like it belonged on the public internet. This wasn't your typical NASA.com front page. The interface was bare bones, just a black screen with a single field for credentials. It didn't take long to bypass. They had some decent protections, but nothing I couldn't work around. When I finally got in, I realized I wasn't looking at files or data dumps. This was live communication. The first thing I noticed was the timestamps. These weren't logs or archives. These were active transmissions, calls, emails, video feeds, all routed through encrypted channels. I knew I was in way over my head, but I couldn't stop myself. This wasn't just curiosity anymore. This was a once-in-a-lifetime peek behind the curtain. What I found was unsettling. The first call I intercepted was between two people who didn't sound like scientists or engineers. They sounded more like bureaucrats discussing something about ongoing communications. One of them mentioned a signal they'd been receiving since 1998. Something consistent, almost like a heartbeat, but not natural. They talked about how the signal originated from a location beyond anything our current technology could reach. At this point, I thought they might be talking about some kind of pulsar or distant star. But then one of them mentioned responses. Responses. They weren't just receiving signals. They were sending them back. Another call caught my attention. This one was between a group of scientists, their tones more nervous than the bureaucrats. They were discussing something called Project Borealis, which had to do with extracting energy from the Earth's core. The way they talked about it gave me chills. They weren't discussing the energy itself. They were talking about consequences. One of them kept saying they were playing with fire, that drawing energy from the core in this way could destabilize something fundamental. Another brushed it off, saying, "The others have been doing it for decades. We're just catching up." The others? Who were the others? I should have stopped there, but I didn't. The next file I opened was a recorded video feed. It was grainy, like something out of a 90s camcorder, but the audio was clear. 3 people in lab coats were standing around what looked like a large, circular object, smooth, metallic, and glowing faintly at its edges. It reminded me of the descriptions people give of UFOs, but smaller. One of the scientists referred to it as a prototype. They talked about its ability to bend space-time and how it was almost ready for human trials. That's when one of them said something that stuck with me. If we can replicate their designs, we won't just visit other planets. We'll rewrite the definition of existence. I should have stopped there, but I didn't. The last call I listened to wasn't technical or bureaucratic. It was personal. A man with a shaky voice was talking to someone I assumed was his supervisor. He said he'd seen them. He described beings that looked human, but weren't. They move like us, talk like us, but they're not us, he said. And they're not here to help. The supervisor cut him off, saying, "You're tired. You're imagining things. Focus on the work." But the man kept insisting, his voice rising with panic. "They're watching us. They know we're trying to catch up, and they don't want us to." I don't know how long I sat there staring at my screen. I wasn't scared, not in the way you'd think, but I felt off, like I'd glimpsed something I wasn't supposed to see. I logged out and wiped my tracks as best I could, but I knew it wouldn't matter. Even if someone found out I'd been there, what could they do? I was just a random guy in a small apartment with no intention of going public. At least that's what I told myself, until I uploaded the files to the dark web. When I uploaded the files to the dark web, I thought it would spark a wildfire of speculation. I imagined conspiracy theorists dissecting every detail, forums exploding with theories, and maybe even a mention in the news. But instead, there was nothing. It wasn't immediate, of course. For the first few hours, I watched the files slowly circulate. A few anonymous accounts downloaded them, but there was no fanfare. No big "NASA secrets exposed" headlines. By the time I woke up the next morning, I expected my inbox to be flooded with messages, or, at the very least, to see some threads dissecting what I'd uncovered. Instead, my inbox was empty, and the dark web forums I'd posted on had moved on like nothing had happened. I couldn't figure it out. Were people not interested? Did they think it was fake? I clicked through the forums where I'd dropped the files, expecting to see a handful of comments, but the threads were already buried under new posts about alien crop circles and government chemtrails. It was like the files had been tossed into a void, swallowed up, and forgotten. For a moment, I questioned myself. Was the information not as compelling as I thought? Maybe it was too technical, too niche. After all, the calls I intercepted didn't scream proof of alien life. They were subtle, full of careful language and half-concealed implications. If you weren't paying attention, it would have sounded like a boring project update between scientists and engineers. But I knew what I'd heard. The signals, the beings, the experiments. It was all there, hidden in plain sight. Still, the internet didn't seem to care. The more I thought about it, the stranger it felt. This was the kind of leak that, at the very least, should have grabbed the attention of UFO enthusiasts or amateur researchers. Even if they didn't believe it, they'd usually jump at the chance to pick apart something like this. But it was as if everyone had collectively decided it wasn't worth their time. I started searching for traces of the files, hoping to find someone, anyone, who was discussing them. All I found were broken links. The few places where people had re-uploaded the files were already gone, replaced with error messages or blank pages. I couldn't tell if they'd been taken down by moderators, or if people had just lost interest and deleted them. Even the forums where the files had initially been shared were unusually quiet. A thread that had been active for years, filled with debates about UFO sightings and secret government projects, was suddenly locked by a moderator. Another forum where I'd posted the files had a new rule pinned to the top: no discussions of recent NASA-related rumors. It was eerie, but not in a way that felt threatening. Nobody came knocking on my door, no strange cars parked outside my apartment. Life went on as usual. It was just silent, like the files had been erased from people's minds. I tried not to think about it too much, but it was hard not to obsess over the questions swirling in my head. Why wasn't anyone talking about this? Was it really so unimportant? Or was there something else going on? I didn't believe in censorship or shadowy agencies scrubbing the internet clean of information. That stuff only happened in movies. But the longer the silence stretched on, the harder it became to shake the feeling that something about this wasn't natural. Eventually, I stopped looking for answers. I figured if no one cared, there was no point in stressing over it. I went back to my normal routine: freelance gigs, late-night coding sessions, and scrolling through forums out of boredom. For a while, it felt like nothing had changed, but every now and then I'd catch myself thinking about the files, the signals, the prototypes, the quiet, measured voices in those calls, discussing things that felt too big for any one person to comprehend. I wondered if I'd stumbled onto something humanity wasn't ready for, something that wasn't meant to be understood. And maybe, just maybe, that's why no one cared. It wasn't that the files weren't real or important. It was that they were too big, too overwhelming for anyone to face. It's easier to ignore the impossible than to confront it. So that's what everyone did. They ignored it. I still have the files tucked away on an old external drive. I don't know why I haven't deleted them. Maybe part of me is waiting, hoping that someday someone will care enough to take a closer look. Or maybe I'm just holding on to them as a reminder that even the biggest secrets can disappear into silence if no one's willing to listen. Life went on, uneventful and quiet, but something kept nagging at the back of my mind. It wasn't guilt or fear exactly. It was curiosity, the kind of restless itch that doesn't go away until you scratch it. I had stopped actively searching for any updates about the files, but the questions refused to leave me alone. Were the signals still being received? Was Mimir Station even real? And what were they doing with that prototype? One night, after weeks of trying to ignore it, I gave in. I plugged in the old external drive where I'd stored the files and started going through them again, one by one. This time, I wasn't looking for answers. I was looking for something I might have missed, some small detail that could help me make sense of why no one seemed to care about what I'd leaked. Most of the files were the same as I remembered: recordings of calls, transcripts, and bits of raw data. But as I scrolled through the folder, something caught my eye. It was a file I didn't recognize, a short audio clip that hadn't been there before. It was labeled with a string of random numbers and letters, nothing meaningful at first glance. I clicked play. The audio was faint, almost too quiet to hear, but I cranked up the volume. At first it sounded like static, a low hum broken by bursts of sharp clicks. Then, under the noise, I heard it. A voice. It wasn't speaking English, or at least not any version of English I'd ever heard. The words were slow and deliberate, with long pauses between them. It sounded almost like someone trying to mimic human speech, but not quite getting it right. I played it again, this time focusing on the tone rather than the words. The voice didn't sound artificial. It sounded real, alive. Whoever or whatever was speaking had emotion in their voice. It wasn't just random noise. It was intentional. I sat there for what felt like hours, replaying the clip over and over, trying to decipher it. Was this part of the signal NASA had been receiving? If so, why hadn't I noticed it before? Had I overlooked it, or had it somehow been added to the files after I downloaded them? I didn't have any answers, but the clip reignited something in me. I started digging deeper, cross-referencing the data with public records and amateur research. That's when I found the first anomaly. It was buried in a forum post from years ago, written by an astronomer who claimed to have picked up the same signal NASA had been monitoring. According to his post, the signal wasn't just coming from a single point in space. It was moving, slowly but steadily. Over the course of a decade, it had shifted enough to suggest it wasn't coming from a stationary source like a star or a planet. Whatever was sending it was in motion. That discovery led me to another, a series of public observations about unexplained power fluctuations near geothermal hotspots around the globe. At first, I didn't see the connection. but the more I looked, the more the pieces started to fit. The dates of the fluctuations lined up almost perfectly with some of the calls I'd intercepted, specifically the ones discussing Project Borealis and the experiments with drawing energy from the Earth's core. It was like a puzzle with missing pieces, but the picture was starting to form. NASA wasn't just monitoring the signal, they were using it, or trying to. The signal wasn't just a random transmission, it was a roadmap, a set of coordinates leading them to something. The final clue came from the data itself. One of the files was a raw data dump, a series of numbers and symbols that didn't make sense until I ran it through a spectrogram. When I did, my heart skipped a beat. The data wasn't just noise, it was a pattern. A perfect symmetrical pattern that looked almost like a diagram. I didn't understand it, but I knew it wasn't natural. This wasn't something the universe had created by accident. Someone, or something, had sent it. By the time I finished piecing it all together, it was past midnight. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. I wasn't scared, but I felt overwhelmed, like I'd stumbled onto something bigger than I could handle. The signals, the anomalies, the experiments, they were all connected, but connected to what? I thought about going back online, posting what I'd found, but I stopped myself. If no one had cared before, why would they care now? Maybe this wasn't meant for the world to see. Maybe it was meant for me. I saved the new findings to the drive and shut everything down. As I climbed into bed, one question kept running through my mind. What happens when we finally understand the message? The idea of sneaking into NASA wasn't something I ever planned. It wasn't even something I thought I'd consider, but after days of obsessing over the files, the signals, and the patterns I'd uncovered, I couldn't let it go. I needed to know what they were hiding. I told myself it wasn't about proving anything to anyone else. It was about answering the questions that were eating away at me. The tipping point came when I found the code. It was buried deep in one of the transcripts, a seemingly random string of numbers mentioned in passing during a call. "Have you updated the sequence for the south door yet?" one voice had asked. The reply was quick and dismissive. "No need. The 492 sequence still works." I couldn't believe they'd said it so plainly. It didn't take much digging to figure out that the south door referred to a specific entrance at one of NASA's lesser-known facilities, a research center tucked away in a quiet part of the state. It wasn't one of the big, flashy locations you see in documentaries or movies. This place was small, nondescript, and supposedly used for routine experiments and equipment testing. That's what made it perfect. Getting to the facility was surprisingly easy. There were no high fences or armed guards, just a long driveway leading up to a bland concrete building with a small parking lot. I parked a few blocks away and waited until dusk before making my move. I didn't have a plan exactly, but I'd spent enough time looking over satellite images and blueprints online to know the general layout. When I reached the south entrance, I almost laughed at how simple it was. The door looked like something you'd see on the back of a warehouse, plain metal with a keypad and a small camera above it. I half expected the code to have been changed by now, but I figured it was worth a shot. My heart pounded as I typed in the numbers, 492-563. There was a soft click. The door opened. I stepped inside, half expecting alarms to blare or someone to shout at me. But the hallway was quiet, too quiet. The air was cool and sterile, the kind of stillness you'd find in a hospital late at night. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting long shadows on the polished floor. I didn't know where to go, so I followed the hallway, keeping my steps light and my ears open. Most of the doors I passed were locked, labeled with cryptic signs like Lab 7A or Storage 4. None of them looked particularly interesting until I reached the end of the hall. The door at the end was different. It was heavier, reinforced with a thick steel frame and a biometric scanner mounted next to it. Unlike the other doors, This one didn't have a label. It was just blank, like it didn't want to announce what was behind it. I crouched down, examining the scanner. There was no way I'd get through it without triggering something. But as I studied the device, I noticed something odd. The panel had been tampered with. The edges were scratched, and a thin seam in the frame looked like someone had pried it open before. Someone had bypassed this door before me. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small screwdriver, the kind I usually used for fixing electronics. It took a few nerve-wracking minutes, but I managed to loosen the panel and expose the wires underneath. I didn't need to hack it. I just needed to short the circuit long enough to trip the lock. The door clicked. I slipped inside, closing it softly behind me. The room was small, more like a storage closet than a lab. But it wasn't the size of the room that caught my attention. It was what was in it. At the center of the room was a device I didn't recognize. It was a sleek, metallic structure about the size of a refrigerator, covered in glowing panels and cables that snaked across the floor. It reminded me of the descriptions from the files, the prototype they'd been testing. This wasn't just some random piece of equipment. This was the real deal. I approached it cautiously, my hands shaking. The panels were etched with symbols I didn't understand, almost like a language. But the most unsettling part was the faint hum coming from the machine. It wasn't loud, but it had a rhythm, almost like a pulse. There were documents scattered on a nearby table, diagrams and notes written in a shorthand I couldn't fully decipher. One phrase stood out, circled in red ink: "Stabilization protocol incomplete. Do not activate." I had no intention of touching the machine, but the warning made my stomach turn. What was it capable of? And why hadn't they finished stabilizing it? Before I could process everything, a faint noise from outside the door caught my attention. A distant shuffle, like footsteps. My heart jumped, but I forced myself to stay calm. Whoever it was, they weren't in a hurry. Maybe it was just a janitor or someone checking the building. I knew I couldn't stay long. I snapped a few photos of the device and the documents with my phone, then carefully slipped out of the room. The hallway was still empty, and I retraced my steps back to the south door, keeping my movements steady and deliberate. When I stepped outside, the cool night air felt like a wave of relief. The drive home was uneventful. No one followed me. No one stopped me. But as I pulled into my driveway and turned off the engine, I couldn't help but glance at my phone. The photos I'd taken were there, clear and vivid. I didn't know what I'd found yet, but I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end of the story. It didn't take long for me to realize I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. For a few days after sneaking into the facility, I tried to convince myself that I was safe. No alarms had gone off, no one had stopped me, and the photos I'd taken were still on my phone, untouched. But something felt off. It wasn't anything obvious. No black SUVs following me or mysterious knocks at my door. It was quieter than that, harder to pinpoint. The first sign came when I tried to log into one of the forums I frequented. My account had been disabled. At first I thought it was a glitch, but when I tried creating a new account, I couldn't even access the site. It was like someone had flagged my IP address. A small thing maybe, but it sent a chill through me. If they could find me online, how much longer would it take for them to find me in real life? The second sign was more direct. I was checking my email when I noticed a new message in my spam folder. The subject line was blank, but the sender's address was a jumbled string of letters and numbers. Normally I would have ignored something like that, but curiosity got the better of me. The message was short, just 4 words. They know. Get out. I stared at the screen for a long time, trying to make sense of it. Who was they, and how did this person know about me? It could have been a prank, but something about it felt too specific to dismiss. My mind raced back to the facility, to the door code, to the glowing prototype. Had I left some kind of trail without realizing it? That night, I decided to leave my apartment. I packed a small bag with essentials, clothes, my laptop, and the external drive with the files, and booked a cheap motel in a town a few hours away. It felt paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that staying in one place was a bad idea. The motel was a dingy, run-down place with flickering lights and a sagging mattress, but it would do. I set up my laptop on the small desk by the window and started combing through the files again, looking for anything I might have missed. If I was being hunted, I needed to know why. What had I stumbled into that was so dangerous? The answer came in the form of a single document I hadn't paid much attention to before. It was a technical report, full of jargon and diagrams I didn't fully understand. But one section stood out, a list of names and roles. Most of them were labeled researcher or engineer, but a few had the title observer. Next to each name was a location, and one of them was chillingly familiar. It was my hometown. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Whoever these observers were, they'd been stationed all over the country, watching, monitoring. For what purpose, I couldn't say, but the fact that one of them had been placed so close to where I lived couldn't be a coincidence. They knew about me. They'd probably known the moment I walked into that facility. From that moment on, I moved constantly. A night here, 2 nights there. I never stayed in one place long enough to leave a pattern. I used cash for everything, avoided public Wi-Fi, and stopped logging into any accounts tied to my real name. It wasn't a perfect system, but it was enough to keep me off their radar, for now. The worst part wasn't the fear of being caught. It was the waiting, the not knowing. Every knock at a door, every unfamiliar face in a parking lot, every random phone call felt like it could be the end of the line. And yet, they never came for me. Not directly. It was like they were waiting for me to slip up, to make a mistake. I spent my days researching, trying to piece together the bigger picture. The files, the signals, the prototype, they were all connected to something larger, something I couldn't fully comprehend. But one thing was clear. Whatever NASA was working on, it wasn't just about science. It was about control, power, the kind that could reshape the world in ways we weren't ready for. I thought about going public again, about uploading everything to more accessible platforms. But I knew it wouldn't matter. If people hadn't cared before, they wouldn't care now. And even if they did, it wouldn't change the fact that I was a marked man. The best I could hope for was to stay hidden, to disappear into the background and let the story fade away. So that's what I did. I became a ghost, moving from place to place, carrying the files with me like a secret I couldn't share. I don't know how long I can keep it up, maybe weeks, maybe years. But one thing is certain, as long as they're out there, I'll never truly be safe. Some nights I wonder if it was worth it. If the truth I uncovered was worth the life I left behind. But then I think about the signals, the patterns, the voice in that audio clip, and I remind myself of one simple fact. Some doors should never be opened. It was just another dull evening scrolling through the infinite abyss of the internet, when I stumbled upon something genuinely bone-chilling. More out of boredom than intent. I had ventured a little too deep into the darker corners of the web. What started as a casual dive into forums discussing obscure books led me to a link that claimed to offer the secrets of the future. Yeah, it sounded cheesy, and the 10-year-old me would have rolled his eyes at such a cliché, but curiosity got the better of me. Little did I know this would shift my understanding of reality itself. The link directed me to an anonymous file-sharing site where a single download awaited the Ledger of Lives. The name was ominous enough to pique my interest, despite the multitude of warnings my brain was hurling at me. With a hesitant click, the file began to download, and soon it was open on my desktop. Inside was a digital ledger, an endless list of names with dates, locations, and causes of death. Each entry was meticulously detailed, and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead as I scrolled through the names. It wasn't just the concept of having such information at my fingertips, but the realization that these weren't historical records. Many dates were set in the future. The ledger wasn't just recording death, it was predicting it. Skeptical yet increasingly intrigued, I started searching for names I knew, hoping to debunk this eerie file as a sick joke. Friends, acquaintances, celebrities, no hits. Just as I was about to close the file and write it off as a disturbing prank, I found something that stopped me cold: my name. According to the ledger, I was going to die in a car accident on my 28th birthday. The location was a street I passed on my way to work every day. Trying to keep my composure, I rationalized it as a coincidence. After all, the internet is vast, and data about people can be plucked from social media or public records. Maybe this was an elaborate, targeted scam designed to freak out gullible netizens like myself. But the seed of unease was planted, and I couldn't help but dive deeper. Over the next few days, I obsessively researched the other names from the ledger. To my dismay, a pattern emerged. The few past dates in the document corresponded with actual obituaries and news reports of untimely deaths. Each one was accurate, down to the minute details of their demise as listed in the ledger. My skepticism turned into horror as the reality of the ledger's predictions began to dawn on me. Still, I tried to maintain a rational perspective. I told myself that it could still be an elaborate hoax, a compilation of public data meant to deceive. I had to be sure before I let it take over my life. I decided to track down a few of the people whose future dates were fast approaching, just to see if there was any truth to the ledger. One name was that of an elderly gentleman living just a few towns over. His ledger entry predicted a peaceful passing in his sleep due to natural causes, just 3 days from when I found his information. With a mix of dread and determination, I reached out under the guise of a wellness check from a local community group. His daughter answered the phone and assured me that her father was in excellent health, laughing off my concerns. 3 days later, I saw his obituary in the local newspaper. The weight of the ledger's validity crashed down on me. I couldn't fathom how, but it seemed to be real. Each entry was a death sentence, and mine was written clearly among them. Despite the terror, I knew I couldn't keep this information to myself. I couldn't destroy it either. Not yet. First, I needed to understand more, to see if there was any way to alter what seemed to be written in stone. But as the reality of my own entry loomed over me, a deep existential dread took hold. What if my fate was already sealed? The rational part of me fought for a logical explanation, a way out, but another, more primal part, whispered that perhaps some things are inevitable. Yet, in a defiant act driven by fear and a desperate hope for control, I burned the ledger one evening. The flames consumed the pages, turning every prediction to ash. But the peace I hoped for didn't follow. Instead, I was left with a gnawing question. Had I changed my fate? Or had I merely destroyed the messenger? As I write this, my 28th birthday looms like a shadow at the end of the week, and I find myself counting the days, wondering if knowledge alone can alter destiny. The days following the burning of the ledger were filled with a peculiar blend of anxiety and relief. I had destroyed the ledger, yet the shadow of its predictions hung over me, a constant reminder of the date that was rapidly approaching. My 28th birthday was no longer a milestone to celebrate, but a day marked by foreboding. Determined not to succumb to the fear that threatened to overwhelm me, I decided to take proactive steps. If the ledger's prediction was somehow unavoidable, I wasn't going to spend the remaining days in dread. Instead, I focused on living fully, cherishing each moment with a newfound appreciation for the present. During this time, I also became fascinated with the idea of fate versus free will. I read extensively, from philosophical texts to modern articles on the subject, each author proposing different theories on destiny and the human capacity to change it. This exploration wasn't just academic. It felt crucial, a way to arm myself against an uncertain future. To add a layer of practicality to my theoretical pursuits, I enrolled in a defensive driving course. If I could not control fate, I could at least prepare myself better for the road, potentially altering the conditions that the ledger predicted. The course was thorough, teaching me techniques that I hoped would never be necessary but that I was grateful to learn nonetheless. Simultaneously, I reached out to a few more individuals from the ledger, careful to maintain anonymity. I crafted emails posing as a researcher conducting a study on health and safety, asking them about their well-being and any recent unusual experiences. Most didn't respond, but those who did seemed to be living ordinary lives, unaware of the ominous predictions hanging over them. As my birthday drew closer, I also began to document my days meticulously. I started a blog, sharing my thoughts on fate and free will, though never disclosing the existence of the ledger. The responses were varied, with many sharing their own experiences with what they believed were fateful occurrences. It was both comforting and unnerving to see how many others pondered the same questions. One particularly engaging interaction was with an elderly lady who claimed to have escaped her predicted fate through sheer will and a series of coincidences that she orchestrated. Her story was inspiring, suggesting that perhaps the future was not as set in stone as the ledger had made it seem. Despite these efforts, the question of whether I had altered my destiny by burning the ledger remained unanswered. The rational part of me knew that avoiding a specific street or changing a daily routine wouldn't necessarily change a predetermined outcome if such a thing truly existed. Yet, I couldn't help but cling to the hope that my actions could influence the future. As the final week before my birthday began, I planned a small gathering with close friends and family. If the ledger's prediction was accurate, I wanted my last days to be filled with laughter and love, not fear and isolation. We decided on a quiet celebration at home, a stark contrast to the lavish party I had originally envisioned for my 28th year. The night before the party, I lay awake, the ledger's prediction replaying in my mind. The rational explorations of fate I had delved into provided small comfort against the visceral fear of the unknown. Yet, amidst the anxiety, a part of me was curious. Tomorrow would either confirm the ledger's power or render it a cruel hoax. Either way, I knew I had done everything possible to face my fate on my own terms. As I finally drifted to sleep, I resolved to meet the next day with courage, regardless of what it might bring. My fate, sealed or not by the ledger, would be faced with open eyes and a heart full of the love I'd fostered in these ominous days. The morning of my birthday dawned clear and bright, an almost mocking contrast to the turmoil that churned inside me. As I prepared for the day, I made a conscious effort to focus on the positives, the warm wishes from friends, the thoughtful gifts that had already begun to pile up at my doorstep, and the plans for a quiet celebration that evening. Yet, beneath the surface pleasantries, the prediction of the ledger loomed large, a silent countdown marking each passing moment. In an effort to keep my mind occupied, I threw myself into the final preparations for the party. I arranged the decorations with more care than usual, picked out my favorite music playlist, and set the table with the best china. Every task was a welcome distraction, a momentary reprieve from the nagging thoughts about what the day might hold. As guests began to arrive, the festive atmosphere filled my home, and for a few hours, I was genuinely swept up in the joy of the moment. Laughter echoed through the rooms, stories were exchanged, and the warmth of my loved one's presence made the fears recede to the back of my mind. It was a stark reminder of the beauty of the present, a gift I was determined not to waste regardless of what the future held. During the party, one of my oldest friends, who knew nothing of the ledger or its dire predictions, pulled me aside. She handed me a small, wrapped gift with a mysterious smile. "I found this and thought of you immediately. It's nothing much, but I hope it brings you some peace," she said, her eyes twinkling with a mix of mischief and affection. Unwrapping the gift, I found a small, intricately carved wooden box. Inside was a compass, old and worn, as if it had guided countless travelers before me. "It's a symbol," she explained, "to remind you that no matter where you go, you can always find your way." Her words, simple yet profound, struck a chord with me. It was a poignant reminder that, though we might not control every aspect of our lives, we can always choose the direction we face, physically and emotionally. The evening wound down without incident, and as the last guest left, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The day I had dreaded had come and gone, and I was still here, unscathed but profoundly changed. The ledger's prediction had not come to pass, and the reality of that was both exhilarating and mystifying. In the quiet aftermath of the party, I sat with the compass in my hand, pondering the day's events. The emotional roller coaster of the past few weeks had given me a new perspective on life. It wasn't just about surviving or avoiding fate, it was about living deliberately, making each day count, and finding direction in the choices we make. Determined to not let the ledger define my life any further, I made a decision that night. I would use the extra time I felt I had been given not just to exist, but to thrive. I resolved to travel more, to experience cultures and landscapes I had only dreamed of. The compass would be my guide, a symbolic reminder of my journey away from the shadow of predetermined fate and toward a future of my own making. As I made plans for my first trip, the fear that had once gripped me began to fade into the background, replaced by a sense of adventure and curiosity about the world and my place in it. The ledger, with its grim predictions, had inadvertently given me a gift. The realization that life is not just something that happens to us, but something we can actively shape with our choices and actions. In the end, the ledger's prediction did not come true, but it sparked a transformation in me that was very real. As I closed my eyes that night, I felt a profound gratitude for the journey ahead, guided not by fate, but by the true north I chose to follow. With newfound courage fueled by the compass's symbolic guidance, I began planning my journey, focusing first on places I'd always wanted to explore, but had never taken the time to visit. The first destination I chose was Iceland, a land of fire and ice, known for its dramatic landscapes and the warmth of its people. This place, I felt, was the perfect starting point for my quest to reclaim my life from the clutches of fate. As I boarded the plane, the familiar flutter of travel nerves was tinged with an unusual sense of purpose. This trip was more than a vacation. It was the first step in my intentional living, a test of my resolve to make the most of the life I had, a life that the ledger had tried to dictate the end of. Iceland greeted me with its stark beauty. The volcanic mountains, expansive lava fields, and towering waterfalls seemed to echo my inner transformation. A landscape continually reshaped by its own underlying forces, never the same from one moment to the next. I spent days hiking through national parks, visiting geothermal springs, and meeting locals who shared stories of their land with a pride that was infectious. One evening, under the ethereal glow of the northern lights, I met an elderly photographer named Olafur. He had spent his life capturing the changing landscapes of his country, each photo telling a story of adaptation and resilience. As we talked, Olafur shared his philosophy with me. "Life," he said, "is like the aurora. It's a fleeting, beautiful dance, unpredictable and vivid. We can watch it pass, or we can immerse ourselves in its beauty and learn from it." His words resonated deeply, reinforcing my resolve to live not in the shadow of what could be, but in the light of what is. I shared with him, though not in specific terms, how a dark discovery had led me to rethink my approach to life. Olafur nodded thoughtfully, as if he understood the weight of facing one's own mortality and choosing to rise above it. As the trip continued, I documented my experiences in a travel blog, connecting my journey to the broader themes of choice and destiny. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with readers expressing how the notion of living intentionally struck a chord with their own lives. It was empowering to see my personal revelations inspire others, creating a ripple effect of positivity and purpose. After weeks of exploring, learning, and reflecting, I returned home with a heart full of memories and a camera full of breathtaking photos. The trip had been more than just a physical journey. It had been a pilgrimage of the soul, a way to assert my autonomy against the cold predictions of the ledger. Back home, I found that my perspective on everyday life had shifted. The mundane had become miraculous, filled with opportunities to make meaningful choices and to appreciate the simple wonders of the day-to-day. My relationships deepened, my hobbies flourished, and I approached my work with a renewed vigor and creativity. As the anniversary of my supposed death day approached, I planned a celebration of life, not just my own, but as a general affirmation of life's unpredictability and beauty. Friends and family gathered, not in the shadow of a grim prediction, but in the light of shared stories and collective gratitude. The ledger, once a harbinger of doom, had become a distant memory, a footnote in the larger story of my life. Its predictions had lost their power over me, replaced by a narrative I wrote with each choice, each trip, each connection I made. My fate, once seemingly sealed by the pages of a dark tome, was now an open book, waiting for me to fill it with adventures still to come. As the seasons changed and the leaves turned golden, I found myself reflecting on the past year with a profound sense of gratitude and wonder. The journey I had embarked upon, sparked by the ominous predictions of a dark ledger, had transformed my life in ways I could never have imagined. Each day had become a testament to the power of living intentionally, of choosing the path of engagement over fear. With my newfound perspective, I became more involved in community initiatives, channeling my energy into projects that brought joy and assistance to those around me. Whether it was volunteering at local shelters, organizing community cleanups, or leading photography classes for youth, I found immense satisfaction in contributing to the well-being of my community. Each smile, each thank you, each moment of connection was a reminder of the richness of life, a richness that no ledger, no matter how foreboding, could diminish. Amidst this flurry of activity, I received an email from a reader of my travel blog, a young woman dealing with her own fears about the future. She wrote of how my posts had inspired her to face her challenges with courage and to seek out the beauty in her own journey. Moved by her words, I realized that my experiences could serve as a beacon for others, a way to illuminate paths when shadows loom too large. This realization spurred me to start a podcast, Paths and Perspectives, where I shared stories of resilience and choice, inviting guests to discuss how they navigated their unique challenges and embraced the unpredictability of life. The podcast quickly gained a following, with listeners from around the world connecting over shared experiences and insights. It was deeply fulfilling to facilitate such conversations, to know that my own dark moments could help light the way for others. As the year drew to a close, I organized a community festival, Celebrate Today, which brought together local artists, musicians, and storytellers. The festival was a vibrant tapestry of life's diverse expressions, a celebration of now, the present that we so often overlook. It was a joyous day, filled with laughter, music, and dance, and as I looked around at the happy faces, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. During the festival, I unveiled a community mural, a colorful creation depicting a winding road with myriad pathways, each branching off toward different horizons. It was a visual representation of our choices and journeys, a reminder that while we may not control every twist and turn, we can always choose our direction. In the quiet moments after the festival, as I sat watching the sunset paint the sky with hues of orange and pink, I thought back to the ledger and its grim entries. What had once seemed like a curse had unfolded into a blessing in disguise, pushing me to live with purpose and passion. By choosing to defy the ledger's predictions, I had not only altered my own path, but had inspired others to reconsider theirs. Looking forward, I knew that life would continue to be unpredictable and at times challenging. But armed with my compass, both literal and metaphorical, I felt ready to face whatever came my way. The future was an open road, and I was no longer a passive traveler, but an active navigator, eager to explore the endless possibilities that awaited. As the stars began to twinkle in the evening sky, I closed my eyes and made a silent promise to continue living each day fully, embracing the unknown with courage and curiosity. The ledger was gone, but its greatest lesson remained. We are the authors of our stories, and the pen is in our hands. Let's write something beautiful,